And what we find more often than not is that almost everything is related to food production that we have. Even when you're looking at beads and those kinds of things, it all comes from food production. So if you come closer, I'll walk you through a few things. So over here is a little bone point. So it's a hoof from something like a daket, something very, very small antelope. They wouldn't have had access to that if they weren't actually eating that animal, right? And skinning it and removing the bone to create a little point that would have been used to pierce leather to create a button or a hole or something, right? These are microfauna, so it's small frogs and rats and rodents and things. We often find lots of these in an archaeological excavation, and yes, chances are people weren't necessarily eating them, and they would have been scavengers on food sources that humans had eaten, and they were predators to that, and then they die and are part of the archaeological excavation. But they tell us a lot about the environment. Certain frogs and mouse species, for example, only live in very specific climates. So we can then say, by studying that this climate was in this way. Therefore, these larger terrestrial animals that were being eaten by humans would have only been here. We start seeing an increase in brain capacity. At the same time, you've got the change in stone tools. So all of these stone tools that you've seen here are quite small. During this guy's time, they look like that. Right? So they're called hand axes, and I'll tell you a little bit about them as well. So we've got the development of this funky tool that's like a Swiss Army knife, which can be used for all sorts of things. And at the same time, you start seeing a change in things like teeth. And therefore the gut is going to change because you're eating different foods. And that's going to feed your brain, which is growing and changing. Right? So we've got this interconnectedness between walking upright, making tools, eating new foods, change in brain, change in teeth, and therefore a change in your gut biome. Right? So making for a really strong and resilient species. And that could be all because of fire, or it could all be because of tools, or it could all be because we started walking. There really is this interplay between them, and no research has shown that one favors the other. They really seem to all happen at the same time, more or less the same time, which is about 1.5 million years ago. Just to focus a little bit on DNA, because that's very much the big science exploration at the moment. So as you know, Neanderthal DNA was mapped a couple of years ago, and we started being able to map the genome of other populations, and sort of the sand populations or the hunter-gatherers from a long time ago. So we're starting to learn a lot more. At this stage, we don't know a lot of things. Like, we don't know why eye cover is the way it is exactly. And we don't know why some people taste certain things versus others don't. But these are sort of the forces that shaped evolution. I'm sure many of you know about natural selection. We also have gene flow, where people are just shagging and therefore passing on genetic material. Genetic drift, which is somewhat more complicated. It's the randomization of genetic variation. So certain people will have some traits while others don't, and it's a kind of random development. And then we have things like mutation. So mutation, we are attributing a lot to things like taste variability. So for example, I am one of the 10% that thinks coriander is the worst thing on the planet.
Yeah.
No. It tastes like soap. I don't understand. All right. So we don't know why that is. We haven't seen a genetic marker for you don't like coriander, or coriander has an adverse effect for you, or you're allergic to dairy products.
And some of us I can't do wine.
Oh, now that's really sad.
No sulfur.
So we think that those are more mutations that we see in time. Right? As Kurt was saying, that lactose intolerance can also be, or lactose tolerance can be the mutation for certain populations, depending on what they're exposed to and what these forces in evolutionary change are driving. Right, so for this part of the exhibition, we wanted to bring you into the story of human origins. And to do that, we had to talk about what is the diversity we see today. So we invited these people to do a DNA ancestry test so that we could see a little bit about their origin history. It wasn't extractive in nature like archaeology used to be. We gave them the tests, they did it, they got their results. If they wanted to share it with us, they could. What was interesting about this is not only were people surprised at their ancestry and we had great conversations about it, but in developing the stories, so there's about 14 people that had really interesting stories that we wanted to share with our visitors. We asked everyone to bring something that talks about your history, your family history, your origin history. And so many people brought something around food. They spoke about, their grandmother's cooking, they spoke about the braai every Sunday, they spoke about a potjie that they passed down from family member to family member. So food, again, came up repeatedly as the strong anchor to family histories. That and music, but we'll focus on food for today. So yes, this basically shows that we are 99% the same, and that the differences that we see between us are really about how we grew up, what family ties we have, what our cultural connections are. But everything else in terms of our biology and what we do is very much the same. So let's talk a little bit about some of the science that we see. So we wanted to talk about diversity.
From so many different people, from different ethnicities, you know what I mean, that made me. And I could never verify this information.
It took a lot of effort for me to do the oral histories, the photographs, the reading.
Survival,
I wanted to
skin color becomes very important because you can't have very light skin if you're living quite close to the equator.
Being South African,
You're going to get skin cancer and you're not going to be well.
very anti.
So we see this variation in skin color away from the equator. So darker skin around the equator, lighter skin towards the poles. And the reason for that is that you need a specific amount of sunlight, which provides vitamin D, so that you are able, as a human, to reproduce successfully. Without it, you have reproductive failure, and as a species, we wouldn't have survived. So the change in skin color, depending on your environment, hot, cold, became very important for species survival. So there are other ways to get vitamin D, for example, eating oily fish and those kinds of things. And when we get to places like Alaska, where you get the Inuit people, they have very dark skin, but they're living very far north. And that's because of their rich diet in oily fishes that are high in vitamin D. So they still retain a darker skin so that they don't get too much UV ray, which will then harm them, right? And they are still reproductively safe. In Cape Town, it's really interesting. We have a diverse array of skin color, I should say South Africa. And when you look at hunter-gatherers, ancestors of hunter-gatherers, so the San and Khoi peoples of Southern Africa, they have what we call high tannability. So they tend to be quite fair-skinned or light during in winter, and then kind of darker skinned in summer. And that's also to protect that variability in the UV rays, because we've got lots of UV at some points and little UV in winter, for example. Interestingly, in this study, when we were interviewing people, Muslim communities, so women who wear burqas all year round, they all have very low levels of vitamin D, and they actually have to take supplements or eat lots of things like sardines and salmon to keep their vitamin D up because they're living in the Cape. It's a very interesting phenomenon that we're starting to see in certain regions of the world. It really was the go-to tool for this species at the time. You can see, you can touch these, okay, they are real, but you can't touch them. They range from about 1 million years ago to about 250,000 years ago, depending on the site and the area. I can tell you that this one comes from the Congo, this one is from Ethiopia, this is from Katu, just north of where that oldest fire was found. I collected that one. There's one in Table Bay. This one is Table Bay. So you can see it's quite a dispersing of these stone tools. And please feel the edges that and imagine what it would be like to try and cut into meat with a stone tool rather than your fancy knife in your kitchen. And then just because everybody should know, when we talk, and it explains this beautiful artwork, when we talk about human evolution, you've all seen this. It's on multiple t-shirts, there's a guy now sitting in front of a computer, typing away, the picture has evolved. So this is not what we see when we study human origins and archaeology. This is not the trajectory of human origins. This is what Darwin said. He was saying that there must have been an origin species, and we broke off, and somehow we're all connected. And he was kind of right, not quite there. What we are actually seeing is that human evolution and any species diversity looks like this. We call it the braided stream theory, and that there's so much interconnectedness between time, space, place, and people, that there's no one trajectory of human origins. It really is much more complex than we originally thought. And then we invited an artist called Mac One to sort of illustrate this idea of braided stream in an artwork. He's a local Cantonian with Khoisan ancestry, and he's a very famous spray artist or graffiti artist, and he created this artwork. And the closer you look, you'll see there's lots of little people and animals all merging into this one stream, which is called braided stream. And then just to end off for this section, humanity's story isn't finished. We are still evolving in other ways. We're often asked, particularly by school kids and school groups, am I going to grow a tail? Am I going to grow fins? Can I swim underwater? Those kinds of things. And the answer is no. As a species, we really do control our environment. So our evolution is mostly going to be technology-based, unless there is major climate change, which is entirely possible. We have two little TikTok things here, and you can sign into TikTok if you have it. And then if you stand in front, your avatar will change and you'll turn into a cybernetic being. And over here, you will actually grow gills. But yeah, we're not evolving like we're seeing in the past. Evolution is very much controlled. We all have air conditioners, can keep dry, these things. If you have any questions about humanity, I'm going to take you to another exhibit. I'm going to talk a little bit there. Alright, so now we're moving into the very deep past. And giving you an example of the fossils that we see. So the fossils that we were displaying over there are in the last couple 100,000 years. Here we're going back 7 million years. And if you come closer, I want you to have a look specifically at teeth and face structure. And I'm going to tell you how food is the result of that. So if you have a look at this guy, it's called Granopus ethiopicus. You can see he has two 2.5 million years old. Have a look at this very big sagittal crest over here. You can see it's got flared jaws. These teeth here, they're not there, but they would have been really, really big, right? And that's because this species was living in like a wood environment. And what do you eat when you're in a wood environment? Okay. Barks, hard, chewable berries, those kinds of things. So big, rough foods that then dictate the muscles that need to be able to move your jaw and manage chewing those hard, rough foods. And then you need this big bone on the top where the muscles can attach. Right? So this is telling you a lot about the diet of the species. We went from living in sort of a bushy woodland region into a savanna where we had to hunt and cook our food and dig for other soft foods and eat berries and fruits and those kinds of things. So we see the shift in teeth, and you can see that shift slowly. So here we've got Paratropus robustus, they're 1.8 million years ago. As their environment changed, by about 1.2 million years ago, they disappear as a species. That's because they couldn't survive because they couldn't eat the food that was available to them. Right? So their food died out and the species died out. And as you can see, much smaller bone, except when we get to the big Neanderthals and archaic Homo sapiens, which just tend to be a bit more bigger, they tend to be more robust than we are today. But ultimately, tooth size reduces, our canines reduce, we don't need to crunch into big, strong things anymore. And that's how we have the teeth that we have today.